Welcome back, everybody. Today, we are taking a look at Alabama v. King. That's a brand new book from Dan Abrams. Alabama v. King details the forgotten criminal trial of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., written in partnership with King's very own attorney, Fred Gray. Now, I spoke with Dan about what inspired him to shed light on the birth of the civil rights movement.
This is the fifth book in a series that my co-author David Fisher and I have written about forgotten trials, great cases in history with a transcript that have somehow been lost. But this is the only book where we've actually gotten one of the people who was involved to work on the book with us.
Dan Abrams teamed up with attorney Fred Gray to bring attention to Alabama v. King. In the all-but-forgotten legal case, Gray served as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s defense lawyer and watched the 27-year-old minister turn into a national civil rights icon. But why was King on trial in the first place? In 1955, Rosa Parks was arrested for refusing to give up her seat to a white man on a segregated bus in Montgomery, Alabama. But Parks actually concocted this plan with Fred Gray, launching the bus boycott by Black Americans. Soon after, 89 people were arrested for breaking Montgomery's anti-boycott statute, including Dr. King. Instead of holding 89 trials, the prosecution only brought a case against the young minister who had led the protest, and so Alabama v. King began. What was something that was surprising to you that you learned about Dr. King through this period of time while working with Fred Gray?
I didn't know, for example, that when he was hired to work at this first church in Montgomery, that he was picked because the previous guy had been too liberal an activist. They were looking for someone who was a little bit more conservative. And I think that's part of the reason that Martin Luther King was picked to lead this movement, was they weren't looking for a quote-unquote activist. But look what was created as a result of it. Because initially they weren't even asking to desegregate the buses. They were just asking to be treated better. But after this case, that was off the table. It was all about ending segregation. So this case kind of pushed everything forward in a way.
As you were doing your research on this, was there an inflection point to you that seemed the most impactful, that if it didn't happen, that this case wouldn't be what it was and what it meant to the civil rights movement?
It was the testimony of the individual random residents of Montgomery who were riding the buses, who for the first time got to talk about how badly they were treated, about the fact that not just they had to ride in the back of the bus, but that they had to literally drop their money in, they had to walk off the bus, walk to the back of the bus, and sometimes the drivers would leave, sometimes the drivers would hit them as they were trying to walk, etc.
Dan, having access to the players that were involved, integral players at this time in history, how come we don't know about this criminal trial really being the foundation that launched the civil rights movement? Should we know about this from our history classes?
No, it's kind of amazing that it hasn't been taught, and it's been largely forgotten, including in books about Martin Luther King Jr. And I think the reason for that is because as a legal matter, it may not have been that important a case. They used some arcane anti-boycott statute to prosecute Martin Luther King Jr. But as a practical matter, the case was critical. This was the first time Martin Luther King Jr. was ever mentioned in the New York Times. It was the first time that he was ever on the national stage. And it was the first time that people in the rest of the country recognized some of the horrors that were happening in Montgomery, Alabama at that time.
Always great to catch up with Dan. Alabama v. King is available now wherever books are sold. And you can catch Dan Abrams live, which airs weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern on News Nation. That's America's newest and fastest growing news channel.